I found such a beautiful teaching to share with you as I begin my talk today. And actually, I really want to say that I received a really beautiful teaching when I was looking for something just to set the note for my talk today. Because when we do find something through the power of inspiration, it is a receiving. And this is pouring towards us all of the time. This particular one is so simple and so lovely and so revolutionary and so radical and transformative. It's from Shantideva, who was a teacher in the 8th century in the Buddhist tradition, and who wrote a wonderful book actually called A Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, which really meant a way of life in which we see our own destiny as intricately and inevitably and in every way tied up with the well-being of all. It's a kind of opposite to the individualism of today, that we could somehow save ourselves without saving others. So I'm particularly fond of Shantideva, and he said, all the joy the world contains comes from wishing joy to others. All the sorrow the world contains comes from wanting pleasure only for oneself. In other words, comes from the ignorance that lets us think that we could make ourselves happy without making others happy, or worse still, at the expense of other people's well-being. I don't think we really need to know much else in order to live well. I think this is almost enough to think about for the rest of our days. Because what Shantideva is telling us there, and what he's teaching us there, and what we know actually from the reality of our own lives, is that understanding that we are not just living together, that we are living in a state of interbeing, that everything that I do affects others, everything that others do affects me. We are in a constant flow of interbeing. And that is the heart and the truth of all the great universal teachings. They might be couched one way or another way, but this is at the heart of it, that our most exquisite power, our fundamental power that we have as we wake up spiritually, is that we can lift others' spirits, that we can benefit others, and in doing so, benefit ourselves and find some happiness in this life. This is our greatest freedom. It's our greatest freedom to be conscious that we always have a choice, that we always have a choice to understand that our behaviors have consequences, and that those consequences are immediately felt by others in our orbit and flowing out from that. So this is the season of giving, and I wanted to very much emphasize this theme of giving and receiving. But what I wanted to emphasize most of all is that giving and receiving are not standing at the end of one line and the other at the other end of the line. They are in a circle and in a cycle. We are constantly receiving, we are constantly giving. The real question is the consciousness with which we do it. The most vital gift that we can give to others is the gift of loving presence. I've talked about that so often. And it's really easy to run by it. We could even imagine those words on a Christmas card. And then, when we take down the cards, we fold it down and we take up all of our other sorts of anxieties and self-consciousness and so on. But I think we need to be conscious in a quite profound way that the greatest gift that we can give to one another is loving presence. And the greatest gratitude that we can show for having received this gift of life and of still being this gift of life, as we all are, all of us here today, the greatest respect we can offer to our gift of life is to make our life a gift of loving presence. There are so many practical ways that you can express this. I think that I've been writing about this for 30 years or so, but I just wanted to give 2 or 3. One might be a new willingness to listen, to really take in someone else's reality and let it add to your own, rather than imposing your own for those few precious minutes. Another might be to see a complex situation from someone else's point of view, whether or not you agree with it, but just noticing that it is part of the world we share. This is tremendously important, because what it does is soften those combative tendencies that are also so strong in our human family. It could also mean a fabulous new boldness in speaking up for what is marvelous, what is beautiful, what is enriching, what is lovely, affirming that, affirming the kindnesses, affirming the positive, because we hear so much negativity in our world. And in the speaking up also to remember to speak up for those who for many different reasons in our world are currently silenced. I think this is also a way that we give the gift of loving presence. It could also mean doing unto others. And when you notice, for example, that some people have qualities that you particularly love, or maybe qualities that you envy, you can receive them and give them. They don't belong to any one person. So rather than standing back and saying it's all very well for that person, they don't have the sorrows that I have, or it's all very well for that person, they've had a spiritual practice through, 1,001 lifetimes. No, take it, receive it, and then give it. In this age of individualism, people are highly anxious. And they're highly anxious not only about giving and the quality of what they're giving, but many people are also highly anxious about receiving. So often I've heard this phrase, I'm much better at giving than receiving. And sometimes there's quite a lot of pride in it, as though it was very selfless to give and a bit more selfish to receive. But I think that's rather a narrow way to think about it. Because when we receive something from another person gracefully and with gratitude and with energy and with vitality, we give them something immediately. But we also give something to ourselves. We affirm to ourselves that we are worthy of being given to, inwardly or outwardly. So very often our hesitations about receiving come from a sense of unworthiness, or they come from a kind of deep, lonely place within ourselves, that nothing I will be given will be sufficient. Nothing I could be given would ever be enough, so I won't receive anything at all. Or we might have grown a little bit used to thinking critically. So what you give me isn't quite what I wanted. So I focus more on what I didn't want, or on what I wanted but didn't get, than what I'm receiving. So there's a lot of wake-up calls, even in thinking about this act of receiving, but particularly of truly receiving the presence of another person. In the Brahmakumaris tradition, for example, which some of you are familiar with, and many of you know that I've spent a lot of time with the Brahmakumaris, they have a very beautiful way of greeting one another, which is not always to give a hug. Very often a hug comes a little bit later, but really to look for a few moments at the soul through the eyes. The giving of drishti, a blessing through the eyes, acknowledging through that few moments of deep glance, I'm taking you in, and I'm affirming and acknowledging that you, like me, are a soul, and that we are sharing this physical existence, but that our identity primarily is spiritual. I also wanted to remind you that when we take on a spiritual practice, for example, of thinking about how we receive as well as how we give, and how generously we give, and whether we can give without, in that phrase, counting the cost, or whether we can give without diminishing it or trivializing what we're doing. When we begin to think of that as a spiritual practice, we heal some of that woundedness within ourselves. And I wanted to remind you that all true healing is spiritual. All true healing has to come from and into those deepest regions of our being, beyond being to the soul. Everything that we give outwardly, and we will be giving outwardly in a few days' time, everything that we give outwardly is an outward sign of an inward grace. That was a lovely phrase that I had from my Catholic girlhood, and you've seen evidence of my Catholic girlhood today with the credo. Also my many lives in the monasteries. What that means is that when we give an outward gift, it represents love. And whatever form love takes, whether it's humility, forgiveness, courage, loving kindness, compassion, equanimity, that needs to be the essence of all of our giving and of all of our receiving. So when we take on these practices, what we are actually practicing is becoming more loving. And what we are really doing is returning more and more truthfully and more nakedly to our original nature, which is love. I want to finish with just one gift that might not have occurred to you in the lists that you hear here today and that you might hear in other places. This is a gift that may not be so obvious, but it is giving and receiving within a single breath. This is a gift that we can only give to ourselves, but that benefits everyone around us. And that is the gift of stillness. I want to read you a few lines that I included in Forgiveness and Other Acts of Love. They're words that come from a 19th century Quaker teacher, Caroline Stephen, and she's referring to the Quakers as the Society of Friends. They are the religious society of friends, meaning there is no hierarchy. We are all friends. And she says, the one cornerstone of belief upon which the Society of Friends is built is the conviction that God does indeed communicate with each of us in a direct and living in-breathing, that he never leaves himself without a witness in the heart, and that in order clearly to hear the divine voice thus speaking to us, we need to be still, to be alone with him in the secret place of his presence, that all should keep silence before him. So back to my own words now. From a place of stillness, all things become possible. From a place of stillness, we have our best chance to know who and what we truly are. From a place of stillness, we can move through and into and rest with our most devastating griefs. From a place of stillness, we can meet life with trust. From a place of stillness, we can give without counting the cost and receive with self-compassion, worthiness, gratitude, and joy. Blessed be.